that will be presenting for the webinar. Who's talking today? It includes Andrew Carpy with Spin Matters, Rick Roberts with Genesis Talent, Chad Nitsky with Bunker, Jason Bush with Spin Matters, and Michael Matherly with IC PreCheck. So, today's freelancer market is too constrained. Here are a few of the issues. You've got a broken talent acquisition process, poor manager and contractor experiences, and compliance and risk barriers to free flow labor flow. So the question is, what can be done to make the market more fluid? And to answer that question, I'll turn it over to Andrew Carpy with Spin Matters. Andrew, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate being able to be on the webinar today. The first thing I'd like to do is briefly define what we mean by a freelancer before getting into the rest of this. So for us, a freelancer it's very basic, is someone who performs work outside of a traditional corporate business employee work arrangement. So now I'm gonna provide some context for the rest of the presentation and try to briefly answer the question, why the freelancer frontier. Okay, so while freelancers and independent workers have been around for a long time, many believe that in recent years the freelancer workforce has started to grow. And quite a bit of the data in various studies really seems to indicate this. And here are some samples. According to a recent Kelly study from 2006 to 2016, the freelancer workforce has grown from 20% of the total U.S. workforce to 35% of the total U.S. workforce. And that's an increase of 75% over the 10-year period, with a compounded annual growth rate of 5%, which is much higher than the growth rate of the total U.S. workforce. And in another recent study by Upwork, it was found that the number of full-time, that's not part-time or moonlighting freelancers, full-time freelancers in the U.S. increased 85% from 9 million in 2014 to 17 million in 2017, adding 8 million full-time freelancers with a compounded annual growth rate of about 20%, which is a really significant growth rate. So these and other data definitely indicate, at least directionally, that the freelance workforce is growing. 20%, which so now let's flip it around and look at the enterprise management view. And data from another Upwork survey of managers in U.S. enterprises with more than 1,000 employees indicates the following. 55% of managers surveyed said they witnessed increasing use of freelancers in their organizations over the past 3 years. And of the managers that already have been using freelancers, 39% said they would increase their use in the coming year, and only 16% said they would not. Finally, and this is really interesting, 84% of all managers said they would be open to hiring freelancers rather than staffing agency temps. Now, whether they are able to is really another question altogether. If you consider there is growing supply and growing demand. So why is that the case? Well, there is a problem. The problem is that the process of enterprise freelancer engagement is really a bit of a mess. We have already temp staffing processes and practices that are well established, and that's the upper part of the slide, that are well established, standardized, and quite mature. And at the bottom of the slide, while it's quite not quite as well organized as the temp staffing supply chain, there are, to varying degrees, elements of enterprise processes for sourcing and contracting corp to corp providers of services. However, in the middle, when it comes to freelancers, it's really not a pretty picture. Bringing together enterprise managers and freelancers tends to be not only haphazard, but there are also serious obstacles and sources of friction. Enterprise managers, on the one hand, need faster access to short-term project freelancers at lower transaction costs compared to those of temp staffing and traditional consulting. And with the current processes, or really the lack thereof, procurement sees problems in getting managers what they need in this area. Among those problems that procurement would tend to see are unmanaged spend, lack of visibility, risks of noncompliance, and more. And then on the freelancer side, all of this rigmarole has negative consequences for the freelancer, including uncertainty and complexity as they approach enterprises looking for work. There are slow, high overhead processes that often discourage freelancers from pursuing engagements. And in the end, both freelancers and enterprises lose. However, the combination of market forces and technology are and will drive change in this area. So, as you can see here, that change is currently a work in process. Solutions are already being established to break down barriers and eliminate frictions and open up the sourcing and engagement pipeline between enterprises and freelancers. New problems, of course, demand new solutions, and that's clearly the case here. As it has in other areas of the economy, technology enables entirely new ways of doing things, and this is what we're seeing. What is emerging in today's digital networked environment are ecosystems of connected platforms and services providers. The three solution providers today, IC Prechecks, Genesis Talent, and Bunker, are really great examples illustrating such an ecosystem, or at least part of one, and what it will look like and how it will function. So with that, we'll get started with the rest of the presentation, and I am going to turn it over to Michael Matherly at IC Precheck.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on the Freelancer Frontier webinar. It's been really exciting to work with Spin Matters, Genesis, and Bunker to prepare for this webinar, because it really helps us see a lot of what Andrew just went over, and I love his word, his descriptor, rigmarole. And I'm happy to be part of the solution to rid the industry of rigmarole. So thank you, Andrew, for putting a smile on my face. We'll get into what IC Precheck is in just a moment, because we do think that is part of the ecosystem that in this frontier that is attempting to bring down the barriers and the friction. But I wanted to make sure, as a lot of good presentations go, we want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing and we all understand the terminology that we use. So I thought it'd be great to have just a kind of a refresher on, what is IC, independent contractor misclassification risk. I think we all inherently assume there is risk, but really want to make sure that we're on the same page and kind of unpack it a little bit. The simple definition is that misclassification risk is that the IRS or any other state or federal regulatory agency, that agency will reclassify a 1099 worker to be an employee of the company. So if you've engaged somebody as a 1099, you've effectively made a classification decision, and the risk is that sometime in the future, after you've either proceeded with or completed that engagement, one of the agencies or regulating bodies will come back and say, no, really, that worker or that engagement didn't meet the criteria, so we're going to reclassify them. And then the impact to that is pretty dramatic and far-reaching, because you basically go back and say, this person should have been counted as an employee from this date. And it can go back 2 or 3 years depending on the severity of the finding. So that's the risk. But it's important to recognize that there's 2 parts to the IC classification decision that is made. There's a service provider part of it, which is also referred to as the worker side. And there's also the client side, or what we refer to as the engagement. You have to, in order to do a proper IC classification, because the IC, the independent contractor classification, is actually being applied to the engagement itself, and that is inclusive of the contractor, the worker, that is part of that engagement, as well as the client side of the engagement. So both of those kind of have to be, pass muster, if you will, in order for the classification to be proper. Now that we know what IC misclassification is, let's take a moment to understand what the impacts are, because as I mentioned, they're far-reaching. The Internal Revenue Service has been very upfront and recognizing what the impact is to them. These are their numbers, their impact statement here, which shows that they've calculated that on average, every misclassification of a 1099, and I'm going to ask that somebody go on mute because I heard some feedback there. Thank you. Every misclassification cost them about $1,000 in missed tax revenue. And then they applied, this is their number, their estimate of how many employees have been misclassified as ICs. So note the way that they position or message that statement. They say they're employees that have been misclassified as ICs. We often look at it as ICs that are at risk for being misclassified. But they estimate 3.5 million exist. And that equates to about a $3.5 billion annual tax revenue shortfall for the IRS. So you've probably seen some reports from in the news about how the IRS, as well as the states and other regulatory bodies, are actually increasing their budgets to make inquiries and to monitor and track the classification issue. It actually coincides with the change in our workforce towards more of a independent freelancer workforce. Some people refer to as the gig economy. I know Andrew doesn't particularly like that particular term or reference, but that's why the Internal Revenue Service is really focused on this. The other impacts, though, are to the freelancer. If you're a freelancer and you work consistently as a 1099, and then you get reclassified as a W-2 contractor, then you lose the ability to deduct all those business expenses that you've been deducting, and that in turn increases your taxable income and the tax burden that goes along with it. There's also a significant reduction in your ability to save tax-free when you're a W-2 worker versus an independent contractor. Other things are more, it interrupts your entrepreneurial objectives. You've gone out and hung your shingle as an independent contractor to start your small business. You may have, a myriad of different objectives for your business, But when you get reclassified, that interrupts those plans and those objectives. And the other thing it does to the freelancer is it compresses the pay rate. Because now, if you're a W-2 contractor, then that payroll that the employer side has to pay and any other benefits and certainly the cost of administering that payroll, that adds to the overall cost, or some people refer to as the bill rate. It becomes much more expensive than what you could have been as an individual independent contractor. But really, the real reason we're here to talk today at the Freelancer Frontier webinar is because of the impacts to the market. As you'll see, and as Andrew teed up, we experience project delays because, once you identify a freelancer to engage, then in order to manage that risk, you have to go through the risk screening, you have to do special onboarding for independent contractors, and that not only takes time and delays projects, but it actually costs a fair amount to manage that risk. And also the talent channels basically have a bit of an imbalance. So non-agency contractors, which are independents and freelancers, don't have as clear or frictionless pathway into the organizations. So we created something called IC PreCheck. And IC PreCheck is designed to remove some of that friction on the service provider side. IC certification means that this individual, this service provider, has met the certification criteria that the IRS, the Department of Labor, state and federal agencies look for when validating the propriety of an IC classification. We provide this certification along with documentation with the contractor so that they can hold themselves out as someone who will meet this classification criteria and has all the documentation and has taken some training and submits to IC best practices to give the hiring managers, the hiring companies, the confidence to engage them as a 1099 contractor. And we also provide this certification and documentation to not only directly to the clients, but also to the client's third-party providers. A lot of larger companies who engage a lot of freelancers engage a IC compliance provider to do the full IC compliance. They monitor and screen both the IC, the worker side, but also the client or engagement side. This certification and due diligence we provide helps them reduce the time to onboard and the time to screen by up to 5 to 8 days. This becomes evident when we look at the traditional self-sourcing process. The traditional process is you do the sourcing and then you do the screening after the freelancer has been identified, and then you onboard and then you start the project. Well, the impacts of that are that there's a lack of transparency. So the hiring manager, the hiring company, are actually selecting a contractor which they don't know for sure yet whether they're going to be able to be engaged as an independent contractor, a 1099, or as a W-2 contractor. And the challenge with that is the bill rate, because of the margin to sort of payroll a W-2 contractor, can be 18, 20, 22% or more higher than the bill rate for a independent contractor. So it really puts at risk the selection and the sourcing process. And as we mentioned, the time it takes to validate that the independent contractor does meet that criteria, it takes up to 15 or more days to do the screening and the onboarding. What we envisioned when we created IC PreCheck was, what if we were to put the IC certification on the front end and sort of bake it into the sourcing process? And that's effectively what IC PreCheck does. So when you look at a resume or a Genesis talent profile or a LinkedIn profile and you see this IC PreCheck certification, that tells you that they're certified and that they've got the documentation to support that classification, and you can engage them safely, confidently as a 1099. We provide that certification and that documentation to support it to the client or to the third-party IC compliance provider on day one. So that basically eliminates up to 5 to 8 days of the time to onboard and the time to screen. To give you an example of how we've collaborated with one of the providers here on the webinar, Genesis Talent, this is a screenshot of how they are bringing this value to their clients, but also enabling their talent, their contractors who sign up in their technology, the ability to set themselves apart, to distinguish themselves. When they go on and they fill out a profile at Genesis Talent, they're asked, are you IC PreCheck? If you are, you enter your certificate number that you saw in the certificate I showed you just a minute ago. They do a quick web service ping, it's validated, and now all the clients that see that contractor's profile will see that they're IC PreCheck, and then they can select them with confidence that they can be engaged properly as a 1099. But we wanted to make this really a value proposition to the contractor. And the way we do that is we make it portable for the contractor, meaning they pay for the certification, they take the training, they maintain it, and that allows them to sort of take a one-and-done approach to their certification and their qualifications. When they become IC PreCheck certified, not only can we send it to their current or the current prospect they're looking to do business with or the client that's requesting it, they can actually use that for as many clients or prospects as they want. It's portable. We send that to whoever they ask them to so that day one for every client, every prospect, they know and they have the IC due diligence package and certification from IC PreCheck. Why do we focus so much on training as part of the IC PreCheck certification? Because the 4 primary triggers to misclassification inquiries come from independent contractor behaviors. Not intentional behaviors, mind you, but mistakes, misunderstandings. And so we provide this training so that they become part of the risk management strategy, not only to protect themselves from misclassification, but to help protect their clients. And this is what we mean by becoming IC savvy. A well-educated and savvy IC is a very safe hire to make. And we believe that's a really foundational way to manage the risk throughout the ecosystem, throughout the engagement. Finally, a lot of people ask, well, how does IC PreCheck work? As we mentioned, IC PreCheck is a contractor-based certification. And when the contractor has gone through the certification process and provided the documentation, we issue that certificate and we issue them the rights to present this seal. It's basically like a seal of approval, but we call it IC PreCheck, and we're sure that you all see kind of the recognizable feature of it. It allows them to put on their resumes, their LinkedIn profiles, their Talent Cloud profiles, even their business cards and other marketing materials, and distinguish themselves, differentiate themselves as IC PreCheck. Now, on the hiring manager side or on the IC compliance provider side, when you see an IC PreCheck coming through your program or being considered for a job or for a project, all you have to do is request from IC PreCheck or from the contractor themselves the due diligence package, and you'll have that day one. We're setting IC PreCheck up to be the new standard for IC certification that enhances all existing components of the freelancer market system and ecosystem, so that not only companies like Genesis Talent, who match talent with client needs, or third-party IC compliance providers who really indemnify and kind of lead that full compliance screening on their clients' behalf. We support the entirety of that ecosystem and make it remove that compliant-based friction, that compliant-based barrier. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us. Now I want to hand it off to Genesis Talent, who I've mentioned several times before. Rick Roberts, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody, and appreciate the time today. So Genesis, at our core, is about the candidate. I grew up in the staffing industry, was trained as a recruiter 24 years ago is when I started, and the industry 24 years ago compared to today is very different. When I was trained, like probably a lot of you on this phone, we were taught to be very relationship driven and take the time to meet every candidate, fully understand their needs and their wants, and represent that in a very detailed way, not just looking at their resume, but truly understanding all their attributes that are important to them around career pathing and location to work and industries that they're interested in and certificates that they might get. You really were their partner. And the client was also that same way, where you were sitting down with the customer and you really built the relationship with that hiring manager and you truly understood what they needed and what they wanted to meet their projects and timelines. And those two things got connected by a human that, took their time and worked off a Rolodex. Well, times changed. Job boards came out. The industry went from being a very personal, relationship-driven business to very volume-based, very commoditized business. And there was a lot of things that happened that were necessary to get for organizations to get their hands around and understand where money was being spent, going out the door. And but what happened in all of that was that there were tremendous amounts of layers that were created that between the person wanting the work done and the person wanting to do the work. So out of Genesis, 2.5 years ago when we launched and went live in the market, our entire purpose and goal for existence was the candidate. And to this day, every decision we make is about, is this best for the candidate? And that is a very different mindset. One of the things that we embrace at Genesis, and it always makes people cringe depending on the audience I'm talking to, is that no one owns a candidate. Well, ask any candidate and they'll tell you no one owns them. But ask anybody that has their resume in an ATS and they'll tell you different. And we really strive to break down that mindset and that barrier, because when you do that and you create solutions that's best for the enterprise or best for the people wanting to consume the talent through whatever mechanism, whether it be a recruiting company or they're going through the VMS or whatever, that ultimately isn't what's best for the candidate up front. So we've had a lot of, it's a paradigm shift and a change management shift, but we know for this to all work long term, that has to be the best solution. And because of that, one of the things that Genesis has done is embrace an ecosystem and a partnering mindset. As Andrew said to begin with, the workers want to be consumed differently. They want to have the opportunity to view their career paths and their brand, and they want to be able to have more control of that. Well, there's not going to be one company that's going to be able to offer every bit of that solution and be an aggregate to all demand. So the only way for that to ever happen to any scale is through partnering. And that's why we're on the call today, because we think it's really important that we offer that kind of solution, for the candidate. Now, what Michael said to begin the presentation was that on IC PreCheck he was very specific in what it meant for a 1099 worker or an IC or even a freelance worker. So just so you understand, that's what we're specifically talking about today. But Genesis really brings in all types of workers on our platform, and that includes W-2 contingent workers, people that would like to go permanent, as well as independents. And for some reason, the screen's not advancing for me. If somebody would do that, you can. Thank you very much. So as a recruiter, if anybody on the phone is a recruiter, you would know and feel this pain And if you've ever been a candidate, which we all have, you would understand this pain as well. But every time that a person is looking for a new job, it's like Groundhog Day. It's starting all over from step one. And what we know at Genesis and Embrace is the entire process is broken if step one isn't accurate. And step one is what are we really looking for? What does the person wanting to hire the talent want done? If that cannot be defined accurately, the rest of the process is broken. So at Genesis, not only do we think about the candidate first, we've created a platform that at the core of it is artificial intelligence. And we didn't necessarily think about creating artificial intelligence as a way to replace people. What we wanted to do was make people more effective, more efficient, and allow them to get back to that more relationship-based business and be accurate from
It appears that we have lost audio from Rick Roberts. Adam Gould, are you on and able to carry on?
Sure, guys, I'm on. This is Adam Gould, the VP of Brand Experience for Genesis. Looks like Rick's probably having some technical difficulties, so sorry about that. He was doing a fabulous job, so I'm very disappointed to have to step in. But I think what he was getting at is that our technology was designed to not be the star player, but to sort of work in the background to address some of these issues that are outlined in this slide, some of the rework, some of the inefficiencies, so that the whole paradigm could shift back to a more human, basically rehumanize the marketplace. Because of those various layers that had cropped up over time, some of the humanity had been pushed out of that equation, and to the detriment of all parties to the labor equation. So this whole Groundhog Day concept, I mean, you can see for yourself that if you're familiar with traditional staffing and recruiting, that it really is it's a linear process that's repeated every time, and both sides of that equation have to suffer through it each time, which really makes no sense. It's a lot like when you go to a doctor's office and they ask you to fill out 4 different forms that contain the same information, and then you go the next day to another specialist and you have to fill out the same forms again. It's quite frustrating, and it's wasteful. So that's part of what we tried to do through the lens of a candidate focus, because we really feel like that if we do an optimum job from the candidate's frame of reference, we by definition meet the needs of the enterprise hiring talent consumer. So here's sort of how this paradigm works that we've created and are working with our ecosystem partners to bring to life. Our Talent Cloud solutions sits in the middle. When an IC or a freelancer is introduced to Genesis, they're first segmented and then go through our talent curation processes. That's a combination of technology and human intervention. We have a team of talent curators that serve that human function, so that anything that's better done by a human, they perform that function. And it also gives a way for people within our platform to actually have human interaction if that's their preference. We think that's always going to be important. And then once they go through that process, they're placed into sort of pre-cloud phase, and that's where they'll have their skills validated. They'll be screened and they'll be checked for compliance for things like, for if they're truly ICs or not. Again, so that's where we would plug in IC PreCheck is as a front-loaded process, because all of those front-loaded processes in our paradigm are going to be stored in the Talent Cloud platform as a system of record, so that ideally none of them have to be repeated by that candidate, which inures to the benefit of both the candidate and the enterprise hiring managers, which we obviously think is a great thing. A lot of those validations and compliance points and badges, such as the IC PreCheck certification, will be stored on the Genesis candidate profile. And you can see to the right side of the Genesis solution, we've got sort of a semi-cyclical process that includes the creation of a client hiring requirement, which they would then, there's a number of ways that requirement can be passed on to Genesis, whether it's through an integration from a VMS, whether they're using our actual hiring manager portal, which is a web-based mobile responsive portal where they can view their My Clouds directly. We make that real easy and flexible depending on what the enterprise's requirements are. And then when they identify a candidate and make an offer based upon what they see in their specific parameters, that's when a back-end strategic partner solution such as Bunker, which is driven by customer parameters and requirements. So that's why they're sort of on the back end, if you will. Then the contractor would then select the insurance that is required by whoever they're going to be onboarded at, and then they would be onboarded to that customer. So the right side of this equation, once that left side is complete, then the right side just does its thing. So by virtue of that, the whole process is attenuated, and a lot of cost and time is saved. So we think that's pretty important stuff. So what does it all mean? I mean, it's a great experience for candidates. We've touched on it multiple times. It eliminates repetitive tasks, that doctor's office form filling out experience we all hate. So get rid of that to some degree, at least minimize it. Marketplace acceleration and fluidity. Collectively, we're developing an ecosystem that has a system of record and some certifications and front-loaded processes that allow all of these things to happen once up front. And like Michael said, it's once and done. And then we can move to the right side of that equation. And then compounding value and efficiencies. As the clouds mature and contractors adopt, the returns increase over time for all parties. The Talent Cloud solution that Genesis has developed really is sort of it gets better over time. And it has to do with critical mass. It has to do with the richness of candidate profile development, a number of different variables like that. So it's valuable right out of the box to the ecosystem as well as just a standalone solution, but it gets better over time. And finally, for the participants in the labor equation, lower cost and faster position fill times. And then ultimately, what we feel is almost most important, less time between gigs and income for contractors. So if you're an IC, that's a great thing. You know that means less lost time and lost money. So I'm going to turn it over to the team at Bunker. And sorry for the technical difficulty, guys.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone. My name is Chad Nitschke. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Bunker. Bunker is a two-sided platform that solves the problem when a contractor, freelancer, or small business has to purchase business or liability insurance in order to execute a contract. And we actually joke as a team, nobody likes dealing with insurance or this problem except for us. We, oddly enough, love it. We solve this problem by embedding insurance products into the contracting process. On one side of the platform, we have members. So these are organizations that have to manage compliance on thousands of certificates of insurance. And today, some of our members include IC PreCheck, MBO Partners, Catalent, and more than a dozen other leading staffing and on-demand organizations. Then on the other side of the platform, we provide smarter business and liability insurance products and embed those into the contracting process, ultimately removing insurance friction. And we call those contractors, freelancers, and small businesses customers. Though it's a significant problem, almost every contract, as I think all of you know, requires insurance, which is why small businesses in the US collectively spend over $100 billion each year to insurance carriers. Before even launching the company, we heard over and over that this painful process adds days or even weeks to the onboarding and procurement process. Not to mention the insurance industry is just frustratingly opaque. And at Bunker, we're changing this. We're removing insurance as a barrier to onboarding and then building smarter insurance products. And I'll unpack a bit more about how we're doing this for both members and customers in the next few slides. So to dive a little bit deeper on our technology solution, I'll talk a bit more about the problem we're solving. So in the time that we've been talking, so literally since this webinar started, I'm guessing there were thousands of certificates of insurance that were being emailed back and forth. And you probably all know these. There's terrible PDF documents. A human has to review those certificates manually, and oftentimes we'll have to go back to the freelancer or contractor to fix a mistake on the certificate or policy. And those mistakes aren't even exceptions. So members that have used the Bunker platform to audit this process found that 50% of the time, those insurance policies are out of compliance. And tracking all this data in a spreadsheet or other tool usually isn't effective. During onboarding, this process to vet insurance requirements can take a week or more, but there's really no reason it needs to work this way. And we actually routinely joke as a team, if Elon Musk can solve the problem of colonizing Mars, we can surely make insurance better. So all of that certificate of insurance data moving back and forth is ultimately a great problem for technology to solve just because it's all data. So now organizations that have to manage this certificate of insurance process can rely on the Bunker platform to screen certificates, track freelancers or contractor expiration dates, and ensure compliance. So this is all contained in the members' dashboard on the Bunker platform. And what used to take a week or more can be reduced to days or even minutes through technology, not to mention that we've heard from our members that it can save hours of time from their employees each week. And there's really no reason why one of those employees should spend another minute reviewing a certificate or punching data into a spreadsheet. And then lastly, we use all that data on our platform to help organizations set more effective insurance requirements. So as an example, a contractor completing a $100,000 project isn't required to carry the insurance requirements that the same level of a large company that's doing a multi-million-dollar software implementation would have to carry. So on the other side of the platform, we make it very easy for freelancers and contractors to fulfill the exact level of insurance that's needed to comply with the contract. So Bunker is also a licensed digital broker in all 50 states. This includes insurance products that can be purchased start to finish entirely online, in addition to licensed advisors being available to help over email, chat, or phone. So instead of the freelancer or contractor being left to figure it out on their own, we work directly with leading insurance carriers, so like Hartford, Chubb, Hiscox, and Berkshire Hathaway, to name a few. And then using our technology platform, those freelancers and contractors, whom we call customers, can now purchase the exact level of business insurance they need in hours or even minutes in some cases. Our customers have told us they love this. You can see from Nicole's quote below as one example. We've been tracking our Net Promoter Score since launching in mid-2017, and we have an 80, which compares to the standard insurance industry, which is oftentimes in the single digits or even negative. And we're excited to say that in Q1, our customer sat rating was 94%. So in addition to building technology, we're also reinventing insurance products for the future of work and on-demand economy. There's a funny story kind of dating back to the origins of the company. There was an insurance executive that was complaining to us about quote unquote bad customers, which he actually defined as customers that purchase an insurance policy, keep it for 6 months, and then cancel it, only to call them back 2 months later to reinstate it. And what he described as a bad customer, we really saw as an opportunity. So that customer clearly wanted something in the insurance industry that didn't exist, and they were solving through a pretty painful process. So we changed that at Bunker, and then in 2017 invented usage-based insurance for businesses. So now independent workers and micro small businesses can purchase short-term policies from Bunker and even purchase that on a project level basis, saving hundreds of dollars a year. We started with reinventing general and professional liability insurance for projects and have since expanded that to include workers' compensation and occupational accident insurance. And we're continuing to build smarter insurance products for the future of work that can be embedded into the contracting process. So in summary, although we only launched in mid-2017, we're fortunate to be backed by more than $10 million in venture capital and also have a growing list of more than 15 members and have already eliminated insurance as a barrier for thousands of gig workers, freelancers, contractors, and small businesses. And ultimately, our vision for the future is that at some point, the Bunker platform will have helped millions of customers and thousands of members enjoy a life of spending less time and money on insurance. And so with that, I'll turn it over to back to Andrew.
Hey, thank you, Chad. Yeah, so I'm going to wrap up quickly here with my colleague Jason Bush, who joined us a bit later. So we can get to the Q&A. I just have one kind of statement to to pull all this together, and I'm going to go back to what Rick Roberts said, that there's not going to be only one company that can handle freelancer engagement. There are going to be partners and an ecosystem to be able to do that. So to take advantage of Jason Bush here, just for a couple of minutes, I'd like to ask Jason, how do you see this as fitting into current trends across procurement and workforce management, and how this is maybe representative of that?
Absolutely. It's great to be here, everyone, and proud to participate. I'm Jason Bush with Spend Matters and work closely with Andrew on covering the broader services procurement sector. And I think what's really important here overall is to keep in mind how ecosystems are starting to emerge. What used to be, a very stovepiped sector where we had, staffing firms, we had MSP VMSs, we had MSPs, we had standalone VMS, we had the services procurement modules of certain products, has evolved into a world with early platforms and early ecosystems. I kind of liken it to the primordial ooze of the early Earth or early universe, where things are starting to gel together, and the notion of different providers coming together and piecing together their various strengths, both on a one-to-one basis, an IC pre-check, a bunker, but then also, assembling themselves in different parts via other platforms and services, maybe Amazon in the future as well, maybe an SAP Fieldglass, maybe a Beeline. But the notion of virtualization, I think, is key here, and how we combine these types of services into almost an app store type environment where we can mix and match different capabilities. I think, the cloud is a great metaphor, not only for the systems themselves, but also where talent is going too. So, the notion of how we assemble teams in the future as a combination of staffing firm employees, as freelancers, as, consultancy employees, as internal staff, full-time workers as well. So how these things tie together through the virtualization. Just one final comment before I flip it back when we go to Q&A. I really think it's important to keep in mind, and we're very KPI driven in what we look at Spend Matters, kind of the hybrid procurement HR perspective on this emerging world of work. There are a lot of areas we look at from a category perspective, be it direct materials and metals and plastics, to the management of complex services where cost and total cost is the major focus of what we call strategic sourcing more broadly. But if I look at typical CPO priorities from a services procurement perspective, risk and compliance still won out. And risk and compliance means taking care of suppliers. It obviously means worker classification, but it means in ensuring that a third-party solution to a work or outcomes-based initiative is as secure as one delivered internally, or be a classic services firm type of supply market context. And having KPIs around risk and compliance and balancing cost is key from a central management perspective. I think if we're talking about this in metaphorical terms and we take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're still in very much the let's put clothes on our back and make sure we have enough food type of environment versus moving up to creating organized society. But I would posit here that the organized society is not that far away as different solutions like Bunker, IC PreCheck, and others come together and mix and match going forward. So with that, Andrew, I'll toss it back.
Hey, thank you, Jason. That was great. And I guess the closing statement from us here would be, therefore, the freelance frontier. So let's go to questions. We have quite a few of them, and we're going to go, since we started late, we're going to go, about 5 minutes over the hour. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So let's see, the first question is in relation to IC PreCheck. And the question is, how do I integrate the PreCheck solution into my MSP solution and talent acquisition organizations and make this a requirement? I guess that means for clients and for workers. I guess that would be Michael.
Yeah, Michael here. Thank you for the question. It's a good question. We'd love to see organizations start making IC PreCheck a requirement. We think it makes sense to put IC PreCheck certification on the front end of our clients' overall IC misclassification risk compliance strategy. One of the other questions I saw in there as well is, how do you do the full compliance screening? We do that first part on the IC. And when you have that certification, it's just like, a certificate of insurance. When you engage a vendor, which, an independent contractor is a vendor to the company, you check to make sure they have insurance. We believe that the certification, your bona fides, your qualifications in the IC PreCheck certification are also reasonable to expect and ask for upfront. But to complete your question about integrating into your current contingent labor program ecosystem or strategy or workflows, we absolutely think that IC PreCheck has a home on that front end. You can go, if you have a talent cloud like a Genesys Talent, then you can put us on the front end and just look for the IC PreCheck certifications on the resumes, on the profiles. But if you don't have one of those and you've got an MSP that is kind of supporting the self-sourcing aspect of your contingent labor program, as those resumes or those candidates are identified, you can, one, look to see if they're certified, and if they're not, you can route them to icprecheck.com and have them become certified. And then the key to that, as we mentioned during the presented material, is that once you see that IC PreCheck certification, on day one, you're going to get the certification, so you're going to get assurances, but you're also going to get the documentation that not only creates the audit defense file associated with that service provider for you to use in the overall IC classification decision, but you're also going to get some very valuable documentation, which most organizations should be asking for with regards to vendor due diligence. You're going to get the background check. You're going to get the certificate of insurance. You're going to get verification that they're an entity, a small business in good standing in their state. All that documentation that we showed on one of the slides, but didn't go over because there were 13 or more items on it. The client organization gets that, and an MSP-led contingent labor program can facilitate and put IC PreCheck on the front end of it. So we highly encourage that as well. So thanks, and I'll turn it back to you, Andrew, for the next question.
Thanks, Michael. We have a lot of questions here, and I'd like to get a good number of them in. So the next question is for Genesys, and the question is, who does the contractor end up contracting with? Is it the end client or Genesys? So
it would actually be, Genesys actually does not actually transact or bill or perform payroll. We work with third-party EORs. In the case of the ICs, it typically would be the third party that the enterprise normally works with to process those transactions for their ICs. Hopefully that helps. Michael, you may be able to chime in a bit too, because there's a portion of that last 20% that needs to be performed potentially by that third party who's actually performing the payrolling.
Yeah, this is Michael. Thanks for tossing it back to me. Most companies who manage this have an agent of record, or what's oftentimes referred to as a payroll provider, that kind of completes the IC classification decision and then indemnifies the client, and then provides that administrative support of engaging the contractor and actually putting an SOW or contract in place between that agent of record agency and the IC on the client's behalf.
Right. So I guess the short answer is that it's never Genesis.
Right.
So Genesis is the platform in the middle. So great. Okay. Well, let's move on to another question. So this one was for Adam and Andrew, but I'm actually going to toss it over to Jason, if you're still here, which it seems like you are. So the question is, where on the spectrum of understanding do you feel procurement teams at large organizations are at in regards to building and implementing these types of ecosystems? And as a follow-up, is there a lead vendor approach you recommend for a client ecosystem? And Jason, I'm going to toss this over to you, but it's really also, I think, if any of the group members want to chime in, please do.
Thanks, Andrew. Unexpectedly, I'll take it. I feel like I'm surrounded by people with 10 times the intelligence on the topic as me, but I'll give you the kind of layman's procurement view on it. I really think organizations are looking to be led. I think the notion of ecosystem is something new, and the outgrowth of the original VMS market, even though it was cloud-based, was really built on the heels of the enterprise software client server world of ERP, MRP systems, early e-procurement systems, other types of contract management systems, which are all behind the firewall, which is about as far from ecosystem as one can get. You laid the concrete. And you couldn't rip it up once you did that from an integration perspective. So I think the more that organizations can team together to educate the market, the better. I think personally, just there's really two ways into a typical procurement organization around these areas. I'm always partial to the top down, which is to go in via existing ecosystems, which I think in this world, the VMS is still the dominant kind of first front line, if you will. But I think what's really fascinating about the whole freelancer movement and the entire gig economy is that the individual solution areas have been very much app-driven, not interoperable with each other necessarily, but it's been very bottoms up from non-procurement users. But I think, putting on the former consultant hat in me, the more you can engage in a top-down discussion and get everyone aligned versus just having these hundreds of individual, really marketplace-type offerings bubble up and work their way in outside of procurement and HR, the better. So I think, the IC pre-checks, the bunkers, the Genesis talents, the beelines, the field glasses, you name it, really need to be on the vanguard of educating folks on the value of ecosystem together. Otherwise, it's going to be death by, hundreds of individual gig economy apps, and bottoms up versus top down.
Yeah, that's a great response. Sorry to pass the ball to you like that. I don't know. Does anyone else of the presenters want to speak to that quickly, and then maybe we'll take one last question.
I'll just say, from my frame of reference, this is Adam, that I think Jason was spot on. I do think that it's a community opportunity and problem. So, Jason, well put.
And this is Michael. Just to sort of chime in, I'll say that procurement seems to be evolving and recognizing the value of embracing ecosystems in a way that when I was on that side of the table 15 years ago, maybe we didn't do so enthusiastically. So things are changing in that direction.
Right. Yeah, I would agree, by the way, just to put the last word in here that, as Jason said, and suggested, there are many channels and new channels that are developing, and that poses an issue or question for both the procurement organization and for the platforms and the solution providers in the ecosystems. As Jason suggested, it's a challenge for the platform and solution providers to figure out how to engage with the enterprises. And on the other side, procurement is, frequently at a loss. And as Michael said, just really at the beginning of learning how to deal with these new solutions. So I know we're really at the close of our time here. So I guess we're going to have to move on. We did have a number of other questions, and we will certainly get back to answer all of those. And Mike Tyson, I'm not sure if you want to just make a closing statement on what will happen next.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. Again, thanks to everyone for participating in the webinar, and it was informative, and we look forward to providing with all the tools needed to navigate the freelance frontier. This webinar has been recorded and will be available once it's been converted to format you can view it. So those questions that Andrew alluded to, those will be, we'll follow up and answer those in the meeting. So if there's nothing else, that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.